On this episode of The Classic American Muscle Car, America falls in love with the automobile.
Americans spend more than $2.1 trillion on cars annually. That is more than is spent on food. There are more than 253 million cars driving on American roads every single day. Approximately 19 billion toy cars are manufactured worldwide every year.
In this episode, we will look at the car culture and its impact on America. America is a vast continent. Almost since the invention of the automobile, our culture has revolved around the car. America is huge by any standard. The population is spread out over mountains, plains, beaches, and forests. In the early days, horses and riverboats were the main form of long-distance transportation. Then came trains, and then, at the beginning of the 20th century, automobiles. While there were gas and steam-powered buggies and vehicles in the 1800s, it really wasn't until Henry Ford began mass-producing cars that our culture began. The Model T was first sold in 1908 and was produced until 1927, and you could get it in any color as long as it was black. People could go farther than ever, transport heavier items,
Such as heating oil, food, and other household products,
and even go camping in an RV.
using RVs such as this early recreational vehicle.
Racing naturally evolved to see who was the fastest driver.
Cars of the 1930s and 40s began to get more streamlined using aerodynamics. During World War II, production came to a halt as America's automotive industry turned to building airplanes and tanks and jeeps. The large fendered cars of the 1930s and 40s gave way to the fins and chrome of the 1950s.
But it wasn't until the 1950s that car culture became predominant in America. Thanks to President Eisenhower, the interstate system of good roads across America became a reality and allowed for people to drive long distances safely.
In the post-war years, just like there had been in the 1930s and 40s, the Le Mans race, the 24-hour endurance race in France, was the king of the hill next to the Indy 500. Cadillac, Chevrolet, and Ford all created cars in the 1950s and 60s to compete and win over Ferrari. During the 1950s and 60s, drag racing was in its heyday. Drag strips came up all around the country, and people started making long rail dragsters, funny cars, and all types of cars that could go very quick down a 1/4 mile track. During the 1950s and 60s, there was a bunch of oval racers who met down in Daytona and started what is now known as NASCAR. It was also during the early 60s that was the beginning of what was known as the muscle car era, a race between manufacturers including Pontiac and Chevrolet, Ford, and all the Mopar products of Chrysler to create monster cars with monster energies that could go fast. Cars like Chevy Chevelles and GTOs and monster Mopars with Hemis were ruling the streets at that time. But an oil embargo early in the 1970s, along with new pollution controls, caused the muscle car era to end, and a new era began. One with vans that had shag carpeting on the inside and cool paint jobs on the outside. while cars such as the Corvette and the Z28, the Trans Am, and the Mustang and Mustang II all existed throughout the 70s, it wasn't until the mid-80s that they started to come back with power. Prior to that, during the 70s, they were literally just a trim package for looks. In the 1990s and early 2000s, retro was the way. Ford came out with a retro Thunderbird, then the Mustang, then the Camaro that was based on the 1969 Camaro, and of course, the Challenger came from Dodge. Horsepower kept going up with ZL1 Camaros, and you would also have Hellcats, and then Demons. And finally, they were hitting 700, 800, and 900 horsepower right from the factory, until we are today.
To the outside world, America's car culture is one of the things that define our society. Whether it is going to a racetrack on a Sunday afternoon with hundreds of thousands of people, going to a car show in your local town, or cruising with a bunch of friends on a Saturday night. The car culture in America cannot be denied as one of the most widespread cultural interests of our nation. It defies time, having been a part of our culture for almost 100 years. It defies age, starting with toddlers playing with toy cars, through adolescents playing with remote control cars and collecting die-cast, to teenagers and adults modifying and enjoying the cars they drive every day. The automobile has infiltrated the American culture from toys, to collectibles, to clothing, to lifestyles. The bottom line is that cars are here to stay. The car culture is embedded in the U.S. culture, and this series will deal with all types of cars, whether it is race cars and NASCAR, or whether it is a legendary muscle car, or a vehicle that is important in history. The Classic American Muscle Car is presented by Junkyards and Barn Finds with Sean and hosted by Sean Dever. Please like, subscribe, and comment so that we are able to bring more videos like this to you. Should they subscribe to this channel even if they don't like cars today for this one?
Probably just for this one.